let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming, feedism, and everything in their orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're welcoming back to the show a good friend of ours. We're welcoming back XL Tim.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi guys, doing great. How are you?
Doing good.
Doing
Glad
good.
to be back.
Well, we're always glad to have you back. You're such a charmer and a gentleman and a stud, so it's always a pleasure to get to see you and chit-chat and shoot the shit. So listen, you ready to get back into it today?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So today we are centering in on, I don't know how I'd want to say this, like support for men. Like, I don't know. I always kind of think when it comes to men doing anything that isn't the pseudo-typical masculine idea of life, like you're not doing a typical trade job or looking a certain aesthetic, there's usually a sort of side eye that happens as a male within any space. It's a very common occurrence on the queer side of the fence. Probably why gay queer things happen in a very small liminal space. But I imagine on the straight side of the fence too, and I think we have touched on that a bit in previous episodes with you, that essentially pursuing gaining and this idea of who you are within that maybe sometimes in the spaces outside of the community that maybe sometimes men aren't always the most friendly or the most supportive. Would you say that that's the case?
For sure. Yeah, especially when it comes to gaining. I find the majority of men that I know are very into fitness, and they're very into eating right, going to the gym, listening to Joe Rogan. And God bless. That's your thing. That's what you're into. That's great, and I celebrate that. But like many, I'm not going to say most, but like many men, it becomes, if you're not doing the thing that I'm doing, then you're wrong. Maybe I can say most anyway. But so yeah, I get a lot. I shouldn't say I get a lot. I have gotten a lot of, why don't you come to the gym? No, thanks. But come on, you kind of need to. No, I don't, and I'm fine with that. I go walking. I do my low impact workout stuff, and that's fine. But yeah, it used to eat at me because even the fact that I was very into gaining, I felt I had to hide it. And so I was just at the gym. I used to lie. Or we'd be out to eat and I would order a salad. Just little things because I didn't want the ridicule to come. And then as soon as I left, I would stop at a drive-thru on the way home, so that I could feel full, because I never did from anything like that. But so, yeah, it can definitely be, I guess competitive is not the word, but you kind of just going with the mob mentality, for lack of a better term, where, if you're not doing the thing that we're doing, then something's wrong. And gaining is only one part of it, obviously, but yeah, that's definitely something that I've had struggled with in the past. Whereas today, we had a lunch with my office. There was about a dozen of us, and the plates of appetizers came out, and people had a couple of bites, and then the server came over. Is everybody done here? Oh yeah, I think we're done. I'm like, I'm not done. I went on to clear the plate because it was delicious. And it was the same when the dessert came out. And I wasn't trying to show off, or make anyone feel uncomfortable, but I was just I was hungry and the food was good. And so that's what I did.
I like that. Tim, I should say, in your experience as a member of that old guard, and I know we kind of come back to this as an experience quite a bit on the pod, but like, do you kind of align with that idea do you see that happening in the queer space, that, when it comes to queer men, that it's that similar vibe?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it is a competitive thing. And I think it's been set up since we were children. I think that since we were little kids, look at toys that are aimed at male assigned children. What do they all have in common? It's all about being the best at something, competition, winning, being a superhero. So men just get set up to think that they have to compete with one another. And I suppose you could link this, in an evolutionary way to herd animals and how the males compete over who's going to, which female they're going to breed with, right? Because we are
Sure.
mammals, and as much as we like to think of ourselves as being evolved, like we have primal instincts. So yeah, and I think that when it comes to the queer community, it's no different. Like gay men compete with each other on a level that I think is more dramatic and more ridiculous than straight men sometimes compete with each other. Like I feel like sometimes two men can be competing with one another, and if they come to a stalemate or a draw, it's either they walk away like never wanting to talk to each other again, or at least they handshake and is like, okay, we're cool. We're not really friends, but we're cool. Gay men are petty as fuck. Like they will just go after one another. And if it's not like trying to take something away from one of them, it's like they'll just snark at each other and talk mad shit and just try to sully reputations of each other. And it fucking sucks. I really don't understand why there's so much infighting when it comes to like subgroups of subgroups, but it's just there. And I hesitate to say it's a human thing because I really feel it's a product of society as opposed to our species. But
Yeah, I mean, I think we were talking about this a little earlier, Tim. It's like, I imagine that I mean, I don't know how it is on the straight side of things, but when you see other men who are successful, let's say that you're typical celebrity, a singer, an actor, and you just kind of go, oh wow, that's a cool guy, that's a human I could aspire to be, that's a man who I'll buy his merch and I'll rally behind, and what a cool guy succeeding in life. Typically speaking, if a gay man comes across like a gay celebrity in any forum, they will just be like, no, bitch, talentless, hack. Like, we even sort of jokingly said, like, the most petty person that we both know, who we shall not name on this podcast, if they came across like Daniel Franzese in a club and hit on him, and Daniel was like, oh, no thanks, this person would probably be like, well, you're disgusting anyways, and you're beneath me, and I was actually throwing you a bone to show you any affection or attention whatsoever, so go fuck yourself. And
you know how many circuit queens act like that all day, every day? Like,
yeah.
you know how many of those I've encountered at a bar? And it's just like, seriously, dude, like you look like you've just been like you're a cookie cutter. I mean, like there's 16 other people in this club that look exactly like you. Like you're not special, okay? And that's a prime example of me
Hmm.
tearing down someone who tore me down because this person thinks that they're all that, and I'm like, it's time to come back down to earth now. There are other people around here that have just as much sex appeal as you, so please don't think that you're, king shit.
Hmm. But then, circling back to the focus on being like support for men, I think what I find interesting there is like, at least on the queer side of things, there is a proclivity to being like, oh no, we're gonna get you, right? Whereas I don't know, like it's just interesting that it's kind of on both sides of the fence, that it actually turns out that there's a little bit of like a standoffishness, right? And I suppose like when you look at the feedist community, XL10, like do you feel like there is any kind of structure to male support within that space, or is it all kind of nebulous, if anything at all?
You know what? I, I've I found I found much more support through Grommr than I have through Feabie. And I'm not saying that as a dig. Grommr was the first one, and that's where I made a lot of friends. And as someone who was afraid of what I was, excuse me, as a gator and as a fetus, a lot of those people helped me. When it comes to Feabie, I'm going to say no. You don't see a lot of that support for a multitude of reasons. One, so many of the men are so terrible to so many of the women on there. Very similar to what Tim was just talking about. Very, oh my God, you're beautiful. Oh my God, this, you're great. And then if the woman rejects them in any way, even if it's kind, to say, you know what, thank you, I appreciate that, but I'm just not interested. It immediately turns into, well, you're a piece of shit and you're garbage and you're hideous. Um, and that's what you see. There's so many women that I've been talking to on there that'll just vanish because what's the deal with that? who wants to have to go through that? And as far as men to men, I don't get many men that contact me on there. Once in a while, I'll get someone who will kind of ask for advice, which I'm always happy to share. It's funny. When I was recently reaching out for advice because there was someone on there who someone pointed me toward to say, I recently, well, not recently, I've been diabetic for a little while, and I just started on insulin recently, and I was looking for advice because I knew nothing about it, and my doctor, didn't help me. So I reached out to someone, and he couldn't have been more bothered by the fact that I reached out, and I was okay. That's fair. You know what? You don't want to help. That's totally cool. But to get aggressive with him, it wouldn't even have occurred to me. You know what I mean? To say, how dare you, and how could you not? So anyway, I'm kind of all over the place. My point, I've always tried to support people because I've been blessed. I've been very lucky to have a lot of people help support me and help me feel like I'm not the only one. To give me advice, sometimes good, sometimes not so good. But when it wasn't good, it wasn't malicious. It was just maybe it just didn't work for me, or it was someone who didn't have that much experience and they were just sort of talking shit, which I think we've all done, and we've all certainly run into from time to time.
I think what stands out to me is, and it's funny to think of how often we really had this conversation just through the podcast in general, is the fact that community is really quintessential to a grounded gainer feedist experience. Just in terms of, first of all, normalizing the thoughts and feelings going through us, right? Like we were talking about this recently, I think for each of us, the first time that you met someone in person who was also into this, like I remember that I was just this like jittering pile of nerves and excitement, like I could have just exploded. Not necessarily sexually, people, come on. But like I could have just exploded at any moment because I'm so excited to actually meet someone and look at them face to face, And community has obviously helped me over the years calm, as it has done for everyone. But also when these moments happen, like you talk about diabetes, and yes, we've done an episode on diabetes. We can always talk more about it, but I don't see people on news feeds talking about medical situations. I don't see people having active and open conversations about, things happening with my guts, shall we say, bowel movements, like things are happening to me health-wise, hypertension, blood pressure. People aren't necessarily having these conversations. And I feel like we need to understand that many people have already gone through this, and some form of mentorship, some form of just, I mean, I suppose like man to man, like that's that kind of like brotherhood fellowship stuff, which I know that in certain communities that probably sounds a little bit strange, but I don't know. I feel like I feel like we could have more of that. I feel like we could have more of that, and that it wouldn't have to be an issue, and that it's not like, people have to suddenly take on a mantle of like extreme responsibility. It's more just like, hey, XL Tim, you're the guy who's you're now dealing with diabetes. I'm now a diabetic. Whoop-de-woo. You're going through this. Share with me your experience. How did you find out about your diagnosis? What foods are you eating? What was the biggest surprise? Do you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like there could be more.
Absolutely. No, of course. I agree 100%. I think, and don't get me wrong too. I've talked to plenty of people who've been very supportive. Even in the last 2 months, when I started on this journey here. But I question. It's not to say that our community is that new, because I think it's probably been around just like most anything else has. But I think it was so not talked about. Like I didn't know there was anyone else that felt this way till I got on the internet when I was in college. Oh God, that's sad to say. But I like to hope that support like that will come with time, because I think so many people are just discovering this, and it's not something that gets talked about. There's few people in my life that I've opened up to about it, not because I'm ashamed of it, but just because I don't know. Let's say I don't know how they're going to handle it, but I don't bring it up because I don't want every time I'm eating them people outside of the fence to think that this is a sexual situation for me, or I don't know, anything like that, because they didn't sign up for it. And it's the same with like with role play. I had a feeder that I was with at one point who was very dom. I'm pretty sub, and she would get very dom like at a restaurant in front of the server because she thought that was hot. And while it may be, that server didn't sign on for that, so let's leave them out of it. If they did, cool, and we'll all have fun together. But they didn't. So I guess for that reason, I don't really open up as much about it as I would like to. And I think a lot of people run into that, and so it's not as big a community yet as I think maybe it could be, or at least it's kind of silent in a lot of ways because there's a lot of people that are still on the outskirts that just don't think they can talk to people about it. And again, especially with Feabie, my God, it's a war zone in there. And so yeah, I don't know. I'm blathering now. But yeah, I would like to see that too. There's a really good. Oh, I forgot her name. Oh, she's on Tumblr. She was on Feabie till recently. She's a female feeder. I think that's her name, female something. Forgive me, I don't remember it. But her and a lot of other people have a group in Telegram, the app, where they have you have to answer questions from the moderators in order to be let in, and you have to contribute a lot. I recently got booted out of it because I wasn't contributing. I'm just really busy with the holidays, everything else. I just didn't go to it. But they had all these subcategories. One was health, and I threw a few questions out there, and I got some help, which was nice. But they have things like art and obviously things about feeding and food and recipes and stuff like that. I should send it to you. Forgive me, I can't think of what the name of it is right off the top of my head. But send it to you. Maybe tell people about it in a future episode.
No, that's fabulous. And listen, if any listeners out there are a part of similar groups or know of any similar resources that they would be willing to share that we could promote on the podcast, reach out to us at thiccradio@gmail.com.
And I'll say this is one of those places. This podcast, there's not many. I know there's been one or two, and that seem to have kind of gone away. Where you guys are going at it strong. So thank you for that, because I found a lot of support through this, and just from you guys having these conversations. No, absolutely, it means a lot. It really does. You guys should know that.
Thank you. It's really kind, and ultimately, it's a reminder of why we do this in the first place, because these conversations need to happen. They haven't been happening, and we always need more people to have them. And even on the point of support for men, this is a form of that support. You being here in a three-way conversation with us as we record this, that's a form of support. But every single person who listens back to this and gets something out of this conversation, that is also that support expounded upon, and potentially if that means that people then end up reaching out to you or reach out to us as a result of that conversation, further support, further connections. And I feel like that's really at the core of it, is building relationships that, again, for queer, male aligned, same-sex attracted, like maybe there's an element of sex a lot of the time, but there's also a conversation point. And again, Tim, you and I have talked about this at length, rooting that friendship in place of something that doesn't have to involve sex. It doesn't have to go to a different place, because sometimes that's where the greatest support is needed, when people are trying to delineate the two, and be like, do I want to fuck this person or do I want to be this person, is oftentimes the greatest queer dichotomy, right? Like, what do I want to do with this person? And I imagine that in the heterosexual space as well, maybe there's a concern of not wanting to come off a certain type of way, or because it's a community that so often focuses purely on the sexual, if you want to develop a friendship, sometimes it's a question of well, how do I do that? How do I approach you and say, hey buddy, you look fat and awesome, and leave it there without it becoming a little bit more of a something than maybe what we're intending it to be, right? Like, how do you personally try to navigate those types of conversations where it's like, I'm trying to give you the compliment without it going to a different place?
That's a great question. It can be tricky, because I mean, obviously for me, there's a big sexual component to this. And I love how I look, and I support people getting as fat as they want. But yeah, it does get, it, the line gets blurry between admiration and, just telling people, what you look amazing, you look beautiful, you look handsome, whatever it is. And I guess getting mixed signals, and someone saying thank you, oh my god, I thank you for saying that, and then getting the idea that, and again, it goes back to it being a relatively small community, overall, where there's very little opportunity, to meet people, that when you do get any kind of positive reaction, that's immediately a green light, and that's immediately okay. Now we can start talking about sex, or I can make an advance on you, and when it's not welcomed, and it gets you back again to what Tim was saying, where then you get rejected, then you feel embarrassed, and whatever else it is you feel, a disappointment, everything else, and then you lash out, and it becomes, what, F you, you're a piece of shit, and so on and so forth. Yeah, no, it definitely, it's what's kept me from, I get a lot of men on Grommr who ask me to meet, and I did that before, a couple of times, and both times it ended very badly. So I'm very, very, very hesitant. Not to say I won't, and I have, but it's that, what, we're going to have to talk. We're going to have to get to know each other, because I need to trust you. There's people that I have that process with, where it started off very nice, very courteous, and then it's turned sexual. And then I had to go, hey, listen, you know what, let's pump the brakes. And then it was, okay, you know what, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean that. Or rather, let's say I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to do that. Okay, yeah, that's fine. I get it. I get the same feelings too. Um, Makes me think of, I don't know, there's a comedian named Neil Brennan. He's a damn genius. He's one of the creators of Chappelle's Show. He did a joke about testosterone, and he was trying to explain. He says, ladies, testosterone is the thing in our brain that when we see a pretty woman in a supermarket, it says, follow her. It's true and it's sad, but we do, I like to hope that most men can resist that feeling, but it does. It tells us things like that, which can, for some people, it can be too much. The old adage, God gave us enough blood for our brain and for our penis, but not for both at the same time.
Gay men have that instinct too, by the way. I mean, not all of us, obviously, but like, there's quite a few of us that have that same instinct.
Oh, sure, yeah, I just men in general.
Yeah,
Or
it's
whoever,
yeah, it's just a man thing.
testosterone.
It's like that, just like that caveman mentality, you know. Like I often compare it to, like, there's this one guy who's in my community, not a gainer by any means, but just a guy who's in the gay community, and I think there's just something about his energy. I'm not even a bottom, but I would bottom for this guy.
Mhm.
And it's because every time I'm around him, the energy he gives off, that like little caveman comes out. It's just like, he would be good for breeding. Our children would be strong.
What I take away from this, right? And I reflect on, times that I know that I've complimented you, XL Tim, and I feel like what I try to do is an intentional shifting of the language. If it's a queer person who, whether or not there's an established sense of attraction there, I do tend to be a little bit more, like, you look so handsome, you look very sexy, you look XYZ. Whereas with yourself, I do have a tendency, I think, to be a little bit more like, you look great, you look fantastic. And I try to center more in on the whole, like, I have an admiration for your aesthetic rather than specifying, results or transformations that I may encourage myself. And, I think that's one of those aspects where it's like, oh, having to change language. It's like, well, yeah, because what I'm trying to do in that moment is be considerate of my friend. I'm trying to be considerate of my friend for whom, there is not ever going to be that dynamic. And so a way that I will ensure that the lines of communication are clear and that your comfort and safety is also considered is to just shift up that language a little bit, and make sure that those points that I reference aren't coded with supposition. And I'm going to ask this of both of you, I want you to envision our spaces, our gainer feedist spaces, as if they are perfect in terms of that support, as if we have reached nirvana in that sense. Everything is as it should be. I want you both to ponder that and tell me, what does that community look like? And how is it different to the community we have now?
Oh boy. I think it would have a lot of subgroups to it, and which you would, for lack of a better, like a subreddit type of thing, where, which there very well could be. I don't go on Reddit very much, but yeah, where there is a lot of support, where it's healthy, it's supportive, where, and again, perfect world, it's where everyone else accepts it, even people outside of the community. I remember seeing a picture or whatever it was of, it was two women talking, and someone said, "Oh my God, I met the greatest, like the hottest guy." And then her friend goes, "Is he?" And she like extends her arms out like this, like to say, "Is he really big?" Or in other words, and the other woman kind of nodded. And I love that, because I'd love that world. I would love to be able to see that world where, two people can be talking about that. Oh my, I met so and so, and then and be able to talk about, oh my God, they're so fat, and it's not this strange thing, and it doesn't make people uncomfortable, and it doesn't, people can just live how they want to live. It doesn't have to. Well, what about their health? What about their? And just let people be and be how they are. I think we're getting there slowly, but yeah, that's what I'd love to see.
I feel the same. I feel though that like at the base of all that, it's just a community that's free of shame, whether it be internal shame or someone projecting shame onto someone else. It's a community without those little
Mhm.
microaggressive comments about like, oh, you should look this way, you should do that, like that would stop. And um there would be, no uh stress around how people identify on the gender spectrum, how they identified on the sexuality spectrum,
Mhm.
or any of that. Like people were just, someone could ask you, oh, how do you identify, just as an opener, as perhaps part of a conversation, and someone could say, well, I'm a trans non-binary feedist, and someone just goes, okay, cool, and then the conversation continues, and then that's, like it doesn't have to be this thing that we all put in our own heads about someone going, what does that mean? What are you talking about? That's what, like I want to see a community where that just does not happen. You just tell people what you are and what you're into, and they say, okay, cool. You want to go get, like, you want to go get some ice cream? I'm kind of hungry, like.
Mhm. Absolutely, that would be one that's, yeah, that would be remarkable.
When I was pondering this question myself, I reflected on my church days, and I reflected on the typical fellowship groups that would happen within these spaces, right? And they're not mandatory, certainly. Well, I mean, I don't know, it depends on your church, but I remember when I would go to these, the whole premise was this is a space for men to talk about their problems. And I actually thought that was kind of revolutionary, right? And obviously, when you think about it in a church context, it's a lot of things where it's like, I'm struggling with sin. What does the Bible say? Let's pray on it. But at its core, it's we're all men gathered together. It's married men, it's single men, it's men of, all the way from the baby boomers all the way through to millennials and Zoomers. It's an opportunity to be like, this is the struggle that I'm facing. And, I think that would be wonderful to see reflected in and across the fetus community as well as the gainer community. People to come together regardless of sexuality and bits and pieces and talk about it and say, I'm a young guy who's heterosexual trying to figure out how to talk to women in this space. Men who are older than me please tell me your ways. Like, how have you found success in this? And how do you find longevity in relationship? And, developing opportunities for communication. And obviously, in the fellowship stuff, it's rooted in the Bible. But in this, it would be rooted in experience. It's people gathered around and saying, like, oh, you're worried about your health stuff. Well, as someone who's dealing with XYZ, let me tell you about the realities of it and tell you how you can mitigate it. And it's the free sharing of information. And, in a way, I also see like paternal comfort, like I don't have like the best relationship with my dad, but I know that there have been older men in my life that I look to for comfort. Where it's like, oh, I'm having like not a great time. And then it's like that man will pull you aside and maybe give you a little hug or a little like supportive moment. And you just think like, oh, like I needed that. I needed to be like championed by another person who like sees me and is encouraging me that like, you're doing good. Here's how you can do better. Let's move forward and let's check in. Like, that's how I would want to see it manifest. On the feedist side of the fence, do you feel like if, say, for example, and I get that thing before, like, oh, a young guy comes into the community, doesn't know how to interact with women, let's say that example transpires where a young guy doesn't know how to interact with women and maybe finds himself in a little bit of trouble. Is there anything on the feedist side of the fence that kind of allows you to like scoop him up and help him to improve, or is it just kind of every man for himself in a way?
It's probably every man for himself, and I don't say that proudly. I've tried. I've seen people in the past, in like a chat room or even people on Feabie, where I've tried to reach out and say, "Hey, for what it's worth, you're kind of going about this wrong. If you're trying to attract attention, the person who would post every half hour, I need a feeder. But there's no one who's waiting for that post to be like, oh, I'm me, I'll do it. It's like anything else. You have to. It's a relationship. You have to get to know someone. Maybe you get lucky and there's someone who's looking for, something extremely casual, but it's pretty rare. So yeah, forgive me. Anyway, I've tried, and I usually get met with hostility. Which I get to a point. I'm a stranger, and I'm telling you, especially when it's a younger person who doesn't know much about things yet. And that was certainly me. If someone had reached out to me, I probably would have reacted the same way. To be, what, fuck you. You don't know me. Whereas now I look back and, my God, I think of me in my early 20s. At the time, I thought I was an adult, and I look back now, like I was a child, just a baby. I guess because you get met with a lot of hostility when it happens, that people that do genuinely try or may genuinely care are going to stop trying because of that. And whereas I think the majority, it's very much every man for himself, every person for themselves. If you're getting her, then I'm not going to get her. So I need to not stop you, but I'm not going to help you. And that's a bummer in a lot of ways. You wish we could all just support each other and all, try to help each other. And you know what? I'll be me, you be you, and let's let that person decide who they want. And then accept it instead of, trying to drill so instead of pushing harder, getting more aggressive. Because we're taught that, at least I was, my grandmother telling me there was a girl I liked when I was like in 5th grade and she didn't like me. And my grandmother, you just keep trying now. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, but that's the shit we were taught. That's I was part of a call today on sexual harassment. And I think back to like when I was younger and some of the things that men, an example from what I saw that men would say to women. I would be, good Lord, like the fact that stuff like that happened and would go on and it's just insane to me. It really is. And, I'm not trying to preach. I'm just saying, compared to now where I'm older and have more experience, oh, it's crazy. Sorry, I'm off on a tangent again. I forgot.
No, no,
where I
you're
was going with that.
fine. I mean, this is the whole point of these conversations, because again, like what we're trying to draw out here is like in these communities where these conversations don't happen, what is going on? Like, and I feel like it makes sense that there are these like tangents that naturally come up, because if it doesn't get talked about, there are 50 million ways this conversation's got to go. You know what I mean? And to that point, to any other men, especially straight men listening, who, you've got thoughts, feelings, experiences from the feedist side of things, please come on to the show, reach out to us, talk to us. We always post our
Absolutely.
socials. We need more perspective, more conversation, and more community, because the more of that we have, the more we're going to see resolution to the discomfort that happens. I mean, it's interesting, like when you mentioned, like, oh, it's kind of every man for himself, and even on the gay side of things, it feels very that at times. People only want to weigh in when they feel like they've got something to say, and I understand that maybe people don't always feel like they've got something to say, but sometimes the core, the kernel of like where people start to, not say when people go wrong, but it's like you mentioned, oh, having a negative interaction, like what's the core kernel of issue happening there? It's probably a small little adjustment that, like, if we took the time to like zero in and tweak that, we'd have way less issues. um I mean, again, Tim, we've talked about mentorship, we've talked about community support 50 million times over. Like, and to the both of you, I want to put this out there. Like, what have we not touched on today when it comes to support, especially support for men, that maybe needs to be brought up and fleshed out a little bit more?
I think something very important is for men to look for support. It's very, very commonplace to think that's a weakness. It's always been hard for me. It still is, always has been. It's very hard for me still. And as I know it is for many men. It's very much how we're raised. You don't cry, you don't talk about your feelings. I like to hope that that's changing now. For my generation, it certainly was not the case. But yeah, looking for the support, asking for it, and understanding that it's not going to be what you thought it was going to be or what you want. Sometimes it's going to be shitty. Sometimes it's going to be good, but not the thing you want to hear, and that's hard for a lot of people to deal with. But to keep looking for it, because it's important. Because when you don't, and you try to deal with it on your own, that's when your brain goes in different directions, because you're the one who's stuck in the middle of it, and then you wind up making some pretty huge mistakes as a result.
I would echo that. I would say that we have to break down the societal expectation on men, and like, if you show empathy or sympathy or any kind of support for another man, it's not going to make you weak, and it's not going to make you gay. Okay. Like, and the problem that I have with all this right-wing media that comes out of the United States, and people who have podcasts and talk shows and pundit shows that they really have no business having, going on and telling other men, oh, you bought a Valentine's Day gift for your wife at the beginning of February, that's gay. Like, why'd you buy it so early? Like, why didn't you wait till the last minute to show her you don't give a shit like I did? And it's like there's this growing thing among the conspiracy theorists out there, and the right-wing people, and the uber conservatives, and like the people who believe QAnon, that like masculinity is somehow under threat. Like, they actually really believe that like the patriarchy is on the verge of being completely destroyed, and like their only reaction to it is to like be even more pig-headed and show that you don't give a shit about anybody but yourself, and that you don't even love your wife. And like it just blows my mind. And it's like, and the fact that all of these incredibly toxic men are married, I don't understand that. I'm like, what woman in their right mind would ever want to be with you?
100%. It absolutely blows my mind. And I see it a lot, all the damn time. And I don't get it. I grew up in a Republican household. And it's a funny thing. I grew up in a lack of a better term, a sane Republican household. My parents wanted lower taxes, smaller government. That was about it. You know what I mean? They were church people. But in the last 15 years, it's completely changed. To where it's just Fox News is on all day, um, and but I think that happens all around too. I think if you just indoctrinate yourself with one side, you become obsessed with it, and then it drives me crazy. I'm sorry, very much with you on that.
Yeah.
But yes, it's very much you're weak to say for as a straight guy who grew up with other straight guys, it made you gay. Even to today, I had a friend who I drank too much one night, and I was just being an idiot. Nothing crazy, but just stupid. And I called him the next day to apologize. And he's like, "What, are you turning gay on me?" And I'm like, "Are you serious right now?" And he's got, I didn't mean that. He's like, "I'm sorry. That was stupid." And I'm like, he caught himself, so I'll give him that. But this was a 40-something-year-old man, who's a smart guy, and didn't come from.
It's just crazy that that's the first thing that's going to come out of his mouth. It's like you mean to tell me that me actually taking accountability for my actions and apologizing to you is a gay thing to do? It's like they have this image of gay men that we all just run around being dramatic and like we're all Albert from the Birdcage. Like that's what they think that we're all like. And it's like, yeah, I know people like Albert, but I'm there. I know people that you would never once in a million years would you look at them just on the street and say, "Oh yeah, that's a gay man walking past me." Like it's so stupid.
Like 15 years ago when I was in high school, I was labeled as a metrosexual before I came out as gay, like after the fact. And metrosexual wasn't my sexuality. It was just, oh, you're a straight guy, but like you shower and like wear deodorant and brush your teeth. And I'm like, this is disgraceful that like we have allowed men into such a space where it's like we have to come up with a new identity that is labeled as sexual that justifies him literally taking a bath. This is absolutely wild.
Bare
But
minimum grooming is considered gay. Like I don't get it.
but I will say there was an interesting study,
Sure.
and if I can find the site for it, I'll put it in the show notes. But it was essentially that in a group study, they found that if there was 17% women in the group, men on average felt that there was 50-50 representation of men and women. And at the 33% mark, men felt that there were more women than men, which is a very interesting idea around power and, how I think sometimes that men in groups feel a certain type of way, which is interesting. We're talking about support for men, right? And I feel like, again, that's that point. It's like there's this reliance on what already exists in order to move forward. And I think we need to challenge ourselves to look for different things, like you were saying, XL Tim, sometimes you've really just got to put yourself out there and see what manifests. And the piece of advice that I would offer in that is to not expect a particular idea of something to come back to you. Like you might think to yourself, oh, I'm looking for the most masculine looking guy to give me some pointers on picking up chicks. So I'm going to message him and he's going to message back and give me the advice I'm looking for. And then he might give you advice that's totally in your brain. You go, this is not what I expected from this person. But you've got to trust that what comes back to you, even if it doesn't look like what you thought it was going to be, is going to be what you need. You've got to be more open to kind of whatever comes your way and making the decision to move forward with that. So I want to put this out there to you, XL Tim. Like, what is ultimately the first thing that you would want other straight men to start doing when it comes to the feedist community, when it comes to support and building that kind of fellowship?
For men, I would say I want you to grow up. In other words, I to what I was talking about before, it's so much the fetish, and it's so much. This is all I want to talk about. This is why you're here. Now, I know so many men that do that to women, whether in this community or not, where it just becomes sexualized. I've done it, and I think I've learned not to do that. But just to treat people as people, and they're not just something to satisfy your sexual needs. They're people, and again, that's why it should be a relationship. It should be. I would say it has to be somebody you marry, but get to know who they are, and you're not just going to sit there and eat and have sex the whole time. There's going to be conversation, so it's very important.
What would you want women to understand the most from your experiences as we're talking around this conversation on support for men?
I guess to keep hope, and I'm not saying this is easy, keep hope that there are good men out there. There are good men that are looking to meet you and that are looking to share this with you. I know it's hard to find. I'd like to hope I'm one of them. But you know, I recognize how hard it is to get to meet people because you get bombarded constantly. You know, if I walked into a place and everybody there was trying to punch me in the face, and there was one person who was like, "Hey, come here, let me give you a hug," I'm gonna expect them to punch me in the face. But yeah, I would just, you know that they're out there. Um, and that's all I can do. That's as much as I can, because I'm not going to say, give us a chance, because that's the last thing I want to say, and then have a woman do that, and then God forbid something happens. So, yeah,
Just to mirror the sentiments, you know, men need to make more of an effort, I think, to want better, both for the women that they propagate, that they want to be with, but also for themselves. Like, we were sort of joking about this before, Tim and I, about how, you know, certain men look fantastic, and yet it's that thought of, you know, you can't put on eyeliner, you have to put on guy liner. You know, you can't use a bar of soap, you have to use like man's wash, or like, you know, it's got to be scented
like a 3-in-1 product or some crap like that. I mean, there's even a line of makeup that is marketed towards men, and it's called war paint.
Yeah, like
really,
Yeah.
oh, God,
like you're allowed to do things that take care of yourself. You're allowed to feel pretty. You're allowed to
yeah.
smell nice. And not that certain smells don't smell nice or appealing, but it's, you know, again, it's challenging the norm. And I think more men need to ask themselves, like, what do you really want out of a lot of things? And I think when it's this idea of support, I think it also comes down to, you have to decide who you want to hear from. Like, you don't have to ask every person advice on everything, right? Like, do not go to the crack dealer for advice on your money. Like, that's not the place to go get it. Give yourself a fighting chance to talk to the people who maybe know more about what they're talking about, you know, and scrutinize that, and then ask for that feedback. And then when they give it to you, choose to sit with it, especially if it challenges you, and go, and then baby steps, you know?
I guess I would just throw. I was saying before we got started. It changed my life in a lot of ways. Obviously, it changed people's lives. I was dealing with it and kind of ignoring it, and I stopped checking my sugar because I just didn't want to have to deal with it. And I ran into this crazy depression, and just always feeling awful about myself and about just in general. And then I went and got my A1C tested, and he was like, "You're this is a bad way, man." So they put me on insulin and just changed everything. I felt better. You know, it's in as a gainer. I put on 40 pounds in the last 2 months. So yay. Now I'm not telling anyone go out there and get yourself some diabetes. You know, if it is something that you do have, obviously it's so important that you stay on top of it. It's so important that you that you're testing, or that you're gonna. I have a sensor, and I check it constantly. The bummer side of it is now dealing with my endocrinologist and trying to get more that I need. But that's a whole other show. But yeah, it's just it's really been it's changed my life in a lot of ways for the positive. Not getting diabetes, but dealing with it and being responsible about it. I would plead with anyone, if your sugar is getting high, even if you're pre-diabetic, live the life you want to live, but please make sure that don't ignore it. because things can go bad in a hurry.
You know, the takeaway I have from that is in supporting men, you are a man. Looking after yourself is supporting yourself, is you supporting a man. And that's probably a really good point to focus on here as well as we come to the end of the episode, right? Like, support is also something we can give ourselves. I mentioned this before, give yourself a fighting chance to have success, have the life that you want, support yourself, and find those opportunities to support other people. And lo and behold, you know, even though diabetes is a big scare for a lot of people, once you had that support, it's even resulted in weight gain. So, you know, even in challenging situations, there is such a potential for the silver lining, which can really turn things around in a number of different ways. But, you know, I think this has been a really important episode again on the podcast. Every time you show up, I think it's a good time. So I just want to say thank you again for bringing your stories, your experiences, your truth to the show. Just thank you. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. It really is. And I'll say it again. Thank you for doing what you do. You guys really are such a support to so many people, and it's a privilege.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you and we love you. Now, for our listeners who aren't familiar with you yet, where can they find you online?
They can find, I am on Grommr as the unfortunately named plumpmygut, on Feabie as timtim, and I am on Tumblr as timmysnuggles. I'm not good at names, obviously.
You are fine, doll. But that's it for another fantastic week here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. Now, if you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, pretty please share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at thiccymouse. You can also look us up on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or at our website at podpage.com/Thicc Radio. If you want to submit a voice note or become a financial supporter of the show, you can find the links in the show notes, and you can always write to us at thethiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by stannnum and Thiccy.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Body by Cream.